Peter Buswell here for DrVoIP.com. This is part 2, Advanced Configurations of Amazon Connect 2020 Update. There's a previous video in this series which we think you need to watch before you can fully appreciate the materials in this section. We have many configuration videos out there on the DrVoIP channel, but we've updated them in 2020, and I encourage you to visit that material. It's about an hour and a half, but it will take you from start to finish in the design, deployment, and testing of a new Amazon Connect call center. In this video, we'll build on that first video, but we're going to move from the basics to some advanced concepts. In this video, we're going to talk about simple speech markup language. We're going to look in detail at contact attributes, Lambda functions, and how contact attributes are affected or can be affected through Lambda functions. Perhaps checking a Dynamo database. If you have a contact flow, for example, that prompts the caller to enter a support ticket number or an account number, you may capture that information as a contact attribute, use it to look up some additional information in an external database, or you might want to display that information to an agent. So we'll look at contact attributes in some detail. We'll look at some Lambda functions. DynamoDB is the database of choice, at least in our deployments as it relates to Amazon Connect. Sometimes we'll require an API gateway. And the focus here is dynamic configuration options. Dynamic configuration options enable us to take a simple contact flow and reuse it, dynamically configuring options, prompts, queues, anything that a contact flow would typically touch in routing a caller to an agent can be dynamically configured. And so rather than cutting and pasting and saving as a contact flow and give it a new name, it's preferable to create a contact flow that can be dynamically configured, and we'll look at that in great detail. We'll also look at some troubleshooting options, tools that are available to you to help you debug any problems that you have in your contact center. We'll look at several case studies. Dynamic contact flows in particular will be the case studies that we're going to focus in on. We'll take a quick look at custom CCP. You're familiar that the Amazon Connect instance provides you with a interface to manipulate a phone call. Typically, you can see that on the screen here, but what we've done here is to embed that CCP in a custom CCP frame to enable us to push additional information to the display of an agent. So before, when we talked about having a caller enter their account number, if you want to display that information to the agent, you're going to need to create a CCP to push that data out to, as there's no place in the standard CCP to do it. We'll look at an outbound dialer application. We will look at a voicemail application. We will look at an SMS request for a callback. Why answer a telephone call? Put the caller in queue. Let them, waste a few minutes of their life and lots of your resources, only to offer them the opportunity to receive a callback when an agent becomes available. It is very possible to publish a number that people can send a text message to, basically saying, call me. And we'll drop that into a callback queue. And when an agent becomes available, place the outbound call using some of the same functionality that we would use in a dialer application. So that should be interesting. And finally, as I said, we'll look at some troubleshooting options, contact search records, CloudWatch, Lambda test functions. The CCP itself has a log. We'll take a look at that. Let's start with the speech synthesis markup language, sometimes called simple speech markup language, SSML. One of the most frustrating aspects of being an implementation engineer, especially when you're trying to get a project done, typically what happens is the customer or the team that you're working with just can't get their prompts together in time for you to do your implementation. So one of the great aspects of Amazon Connect is Poly, the text-to-speech engine. Poly is extremely powerful, has typically I do my prompts in Poly with text-to-speech so I can get my work done. It gives people the opportunity to test prompts, and we can easily make changes. And then if you insist, you can go and get these prompts recorded by a voice artist of your choosing. I have found, however, that the natural language processing of Amazon Poly and the various strategies for manipulating that speech, selecting the voice, the accent, you're getting to the point where there is really no need to use a voice artist. And for us implementation engineers, this is great news. But let's take a look at the benefits of Poly. Are just what I've described. It's natural sounding voices. You can store and redistribute the speech. You can either play it as a prompt, but you can actually use it for other things other than the Amazon call center. For example, on the website, we even enable Poly to speak the blog information. So it's a very powerful tool. It can be delivered using real-time streaming, and you can customize the control and speech output. And it's a very, very low-cost solution. So speech markup language is basically very similar to HTML markup language. If you've ever built a website and you have created some HTML, you understand the concept of an opening tag and a closing tag. And that's all we're going to do here. What you're looking at on the screen is a prompt. Thanks for calling DrVoIP, home of the Dexter dashboard, yada, yada, yada. But you'll notice here in black that we start with a tag that says speak. And you'll see down here /speak. These are examples of open and closing tags. So in this case, the speech markup language tag says speak everything that's written in text that's not in a tag between the opening tag and the closing tag. And we also have, for example, this other tag here called prosody rate. And this is a tool that enables us to slow down or speed up the speech as we go along. And I like to control that. So I put in a prosody rate of about 93%. You can play with it, change the speed. You can even make it more than 100% if you want to be completely crazed. From time to time in speech, we want to take a break. So here we're saying, and by the way, this is an example of a self-enclosed tag. The speech tag has an open tag and a closed tag, and the prosody has an open tag as well as a closed prosody, but the break tag is self-contained, and this is very common in HTML. So what we're saying here is home of the Dexter dashboard for Amazon Connect call centers. Pause for a second, Press 1 for sales, press 2 for support. So that's the concept of speech markup language. One of the, if you've been inside the call center, you know that you select text to speech or chat text, and you write out your text. And what you want to do is switch the little interpret button here. It either says text or SSML. And I guarantee the first mistake you'll make is you'll go ahead and put in your speak tags, call the call center, and you're going to hear speak. When using SSML, do not forget to change the interpret as from text to SML/speak. Okay, you're going to hear the tags being spoken. Well, you don't want them spoken, but the reason is because you forgot to change from text to SSML. At this point, all deployments, I just use SSML. It's a habit. There's nothing to think about. Some of the capabilities that you'll find as you explore SSML is that you can create ways to manipulate the speech. So for example, in our callback application, we say to the customer, the number you entered was 1858945, etc. Now, if I don't put in a tag that says say as interpret as a telephone number, it's probably going to come back and say the number you entered was 185,675,200. It's going to read it back as a stream of digits. You want it to be read back as a telephone number. So you have these different tags that you add to your text copy to manipulate. There's a whole library of these, and I'll show you where you can get them. You write out your text. You're going to put in at least your opening and closing speech tags, and you're going to change your text box here. Don't forget to change it to interpret as SSML. There are some special characters that you cannot use in your text. I'll tell you a troubleshooting step right now. You call into your call flow to verify your prompts, and you hear total silence. If you have declared your text block to be SSML, and you use any of the characters that are reserved in SSML, you're going to hear silence. And that'll be your first clue to go back into your prompt and see if you're using any one of these characters, right? They are reserved, and you can't make them part of your text block. There are documents that will show you the various tags that you can use. On AWS, it doesn't have to be AWS. SSML is a language used outside of the call center. So if you do a Google on SSML, you'll probably get a list of tags that you can make use of. Break, emphasize. I want to emphasize this particular. I want to change languages. I want to add pauses, paragraphs. I want to control pronunciation. There are all types of information tags that you can use in your deployment. You're not going to memorize them. Just take a look at the documentation and everything will be fine. And you will find using SSML will give you great control over your prompts. Number one, using text to speech in general will help you get your deployments done quickly and enable you to make changes that satisfy all of the people that are going to come over and say, I don't like that prompt. Let's start a discussion about contact attributes. What are they? Where do we use them? And how to make them effective in enhancing the customer experience as calls go through your call center and your various contact flows. So what is a contact attribute? Again, an example being a call comes into your call center and you prompt the caller for their ticket number or their account number or their order number, something that you're going to ask the caller to input. We're going to take that input and we're going to assign it a friendly name. It's going to become a parameter that we're going to, or a variable that we're going to use later on in the contact flow. And we may want to display that attribute to the agent. So what you see here on the screen is a simple custom CCP that enables me to push a contact attribute out to the agent when the call is presented. So, sometimes the contact attributes are not very useful. For example, in this case, apparently, I've looked up where I'm going to transfer this caller, and I brought back a contact attribute name transfer to flow. Not very informative for the agent, but I may want to bring back a custom prompt. Or, let's take an example in which a callback, I want to know the name of the individual that we're calling back. And we retrieve a contact attribute, say name, Peter, phone number, etc. And we can display that to the agent. Contact attributes are typically invoked in partnership with invoking a Lambda function. So we're going to look at real stuff here, but just a couple of PowerPoint slides to set the context when we look at the real stuff, okay? So in this simple contact flow, we come in, we set the logging behavior, we set the recording behavior, and then we invoke a Lambda function, and we're going to bring back, the Lambda function presumably is going out to a Dynamo database to get some information that we're going to need to route this call. And we might then use the check contact attributes to look at the information that we brought back in this Lambda function. And then we want to perhaps, in this case, we're going to call a phone number. So apparently, in this contact flow, we go out into a database based on caller ID or some other parameter. We bring back the information. We're going to check that contact attribute. And apparently it looks like here, if it's equal to the number 200, we want to call a telephone number. So the real takeaway here is that we can check a contact attribute and take action or branch based on that contact attribute. Here are some of the rules, and I have to tell you up front that they're not hard, fast. I can tell you they're good rules to follow, but sometimes it just doesn't work the way it says. So typically, if you're going to go outside of the contact center to an external database and bring back some information, you're going to refer to that as $.external. So when we had that Lambda function go out and get a piece of information, we brought it back. We set the contact attribute to give it a name, and we refer to it as $.external. Whatever that variable name is, the attribute name. That's what you're going to put after that. So $.external account code, okay? If it's a contact attribute that you created in your contact flow, then it's considered to be user defined, and as such, you set the contact attribute block, and you're going to refer to it as $attributes, plural, variable name. So $attributes account code. You can also do this with streaming APIs and endpoints where you might want to go and get information from those endpoints. I'll tell you right now, 90% of what you're going to be doing as an implementation engineer in the design of an Amazon Connect call center is you're going to be working with either external variables or variables that you create in your contact flow. So let's take a look at a sample flow here where we store the customer input. So perhaps we're asking them to enter a telephone number or an account code. And what we're going to do here is set the contact attributes that we collected here. So typically, I don't know, if we said, please enter your account code, here we would say set the contact attribute, give it a name, account code. And that's a perfect example of a locally set variable. And later on, we might pass that information that we collected from the caller to a Lambda function that's going to go out and get maybe the caller's name, right? We ask them to put in their account number. We set the contact attribute to be account number. Then we go out here and look up their name so we can say, thanks, Peter. Please hold for the next available agent or something like that. But let's look at each of these three blocks. So we're setting the contact attribute, and you'll see when we look at the real one that it's either a text or an attribute, and we'll cover them both. But in this case, we're going to select the type of contact attribute. In this case, it's going to be a system attribute. Now, in the contact center, there are a number of attributes that are created by the system. For example, the calling phone number, the number that was called, information that the user entered in step 1 here, and that would be a system type, and the attribute that we're interested in is stored customer input. And what we're saying here is let's take that information, the customer number, and assign it to a variable that we're going to call number in this case. So we took the number that the customer entered, and we assigned it to a contact attribute, and we gave it the name status code. And we also apparently grabbed the customer number and assigned it to a contact attribute that we named number. So this value here is going to be passed to the destination key named number. When you're invoking a Lambda function, for example, you're typically going to either grab a contact attribute that is either user-defined, it's external. Sometimes we use Lex for speech recognition, right? I create, for example, dial by name functions. So please speak the name of the person you're trying to reach, and they say Peter. That's a Lex slot, and we can take Peter now and pass it off to a Lambda function that's going to look up Peter's extension number. So there are different types of attributes. You're going to pick, typically it's a user-defined attribute or it's an external attribute. Again, you're selecting the type of attribute and you're passing it to a contact attribute, destination key, number. So maybe in my external database, I want to look up the number field. So again, you'll do this when you're invoking a Lambda function. You're going to set the variables that you want that function to be aware of. And there are, you'll see when we look at real code here, we're just looking at a slide at the moment, you'll find that there are many predefined types of attributes. There's system attributes, there's attributes for the agent, there's attributes for queues, obviously user defined. You can go nuts there creating your own. And we'll look at real examples of this. So now we're on to, I guess, step 2. Once again, we're about to go to step 3. We want to invoke the Lambda function. But we got some information in step 1 and 2. And I can see here that, again, he got an attribute called status code. We're going to pass it in with that same name, status code. Here we're taking the customer's number, which is a system attribute. The system knows the number that the customer is calling from, and we're going to pass that into our Lambda function in a variable named number. If you're a programmer working with any JavaScript or C+, it doesn't matter. You're used to working with variables. So as we begin talking about dynamic configurations, let me give you the setup for this. Here's a typical call tree, right? In this example, we're actually using Lex to figure out what this caller wants, right? So they're going to call in. We're going to set the recording behavior. We're going to set the whole flow. We're going to check hours. And then the next thing we're going to do is present them with a typical IVR menu. In this case, we're using Lex. We're going to let you speak. So thanks for calling DrVoIP. Please speak the name of the person you want to talk to, or say a function like sales. And Lex is going to take that, and it's going to have a intent that's talk to sales. You know, press 1 for sales, press 2 for DrVoIP, press 3 for technical support, and so forth. This could be spoken or it could be touch tone. But the end result is typically what you're going to do here is you're going to drag a line up here and say transfer to flow. And you want to transfer this to tech support. And if they press 2, transfer to accounting. If they press 3, transfer to something else. So what we're doing here is creating multiple flows to handle something that a single contact flow could handle. And that's the beauty of a dynamically configured transfer. So here it is, the same subset, right? We're still getting the customer input, and 1 for sales, and 2 for this, and 3 for that, and 4 for that, and so forth. But what's different here is all of the outputs are connected to the same transfer to flow. How is that accomplished? Simply, we're going to take the intent, whether it was press 1 or if this is speech recognition, that's a Lex intent. We're going to pass it over here to a Lambda function that's going to go out into a DynamoDB database and bring back configuration data that we need to support each of these different selections. But you can see the economy here. It's one contact flow to maintain. We're going to press 1 for sales. We're going to take that information, go out to a database. We're going to bring back, in this example, it's probably the QueueId, and then we're going to transfer to the flow that we pulled back from the database. So you can see this version and this version, and this is the essence of a dynamically configured contact flow. Dynamic contact flows give us a single contact flow where we can identify either the queue or the flow. Sometimes transferring to queue is not desired because there's some other information that we want to configure, not just transfer the call to queue. We want to do things like maybe check the business hours for that queue, check to see if someone is logged into that queue. This would require a flow. So you would transfer to the sales flow rather than transfer to the sales queue, right? You can load new prompts. Part of what we pull back is prompts that we need to play, options that we need to offer the caller. We can bring back languages, right? The caller selected the Spanish-speaking queue. I don't want to reconfigure everything. I could use the same contact flow. It's just when I did my database dip, I pulled back the Spanish prompts rather than the English prompts. Very useful in applications, for example, dial by name, where we're going to let someone speak the name of a function like sales, or we're going to speak the name of an individual and then translate that into an extension number or a contact flow ID. Dynamic contact flows can include text-to-speech prompts. They can include recorded prompts, menu options. I can reconfigure an IVR, get customer input with new options. We can dynamically select queues, contact flow transfers, hold flows, whisper flows, contact attributes, caller ID. All of this can be set on the fly. And again, this is why we use dynamic configuration rather than hard coding your content. We're going to take a look at two dialer applications that make use of some of the dynamic configuration and contact attribute strategies we've been discussing so far in this video. We're going to look at two dialers. The first one is familiar to many people. It's called Press 1. So we're going to have an outbound dialer. It's going to call a phone number or a list of phone numbers. It's going to play an announcement, and it's going to offer the called party the option to press 1 to scream at a staff member about auto-dialing them. But the functionality is what we're focused on here. It's a very simple dialer, whereas the second dialer is a bit more sophisticated. This is actually a project that we implemented for an emergency response organization that needed to contact a list of emergency facilities, verify that that facility is aware of a particular emergency, and offer them the opportunity to speak to someone about getting additional resources or just confirming that they're aware of the emergency and no further action from Emergency Central is required. And then we're going to update a database with a status code. Let's say 1 indicates we've been contacted, 2, we require additional assistance, 3, for whatever reason, we could not complete a verification to that firm. So those are two applications we're going to take a look at. The outbound dialer in both situations is going to use some interesting external resources. So the contact flows, we have to have a contact flow to start and stop the dialer. We're going to have one that is going to be responsible for updating the notification database, and then again resetting the database, clearing all of the status codes. So in this application, the contact flow is going to examine the database through a Lambda function. It's going to expect to see all zeros, meaning they haven't been called yet. And then it's going to update that status. And at some point, it will have finished with the list. And we may need to reuse that list, and we'll need to reset the database. So we'll be using, obviously, Amazon Connect is the engine that we use to support the dialer. We'll be using DynamoDB databases, Lambda functions, simple notification, and various IAM roles. So again, the IAM role that we need to create is going to have permissions to start the outbound dialer function. Most folks are not aware that this exists, but there is a function within Amazon Connect for outbound dialing. It is a function. You can access it, you can modify it, and you can include it in your configurations. But it does require a particular IAM role to fire it off. We're also going to need an IAM role that can, take action vis-a-vis Lambda, DynamoDB, and SNS. The dialer components are going to be the contact list, at least for the second application. The Lambda functions, we're going to need a function to authorize the start and stop of the dialer. We're going to need one to update the call status, and we're going to need one to reset the status code. So the contact flows are basically authorize the start-stop dialer and the outbound announcement options. And we'll look at real ones here, just giving you some context here in the slides. So when we're setting up the IAM roles, there are many existing roles. The one that I want you to be most aware of is this role here called Amazon Connect Full Access. So basically, you're going to create a role. Sometimes you create a user and put the user, assign the user to a role or a group. And in this case, there is a Amazon Connect Full Access, and it has a very extensive list of permissions, things as simple as being able to access the logs, directory services, Kinesis, various roles that we will need the Connect instance to have the ability to make use of. One of them in the Connect is this concept of start outbound voice contact. Start outbound voice contact. This is critical to the dialer application, so be aware of it. In addition to accessing the function itself, you need to know that it's a permission that has to be applied in order for the dialer to work. So let's take a look at the actual contact flows that support the first dialer. This is a very simple dialer, but it emphasizes some of the real-world contact attributes and functions that we've been discussing. So typically, When we start this particular contact flow, we set the logging behavior. We play a prompt. Let's take a look at the prompt. You have reached the emergency notification system. You will be prompted to enter a phone number of the team member you want to notify. You will also be offered the opportunity to enter additional notification numbers. So this was originally a part of a contact flow for emergency after hours notification to an on-call tech. So we're going to note that we're not using the typical get customer input, which you might normally use in an IVR call tree. This has a limitation in that if you're using DTMF, you can only input one digit there. Over here, store customer input. We're just going to store what the customer gives us. So we're asking them to put in a 10-digit telephone number. And by the way, notice my speak tag and my closing tag here, and the fact that this prompt is not a text prompt, it's a SSML prompt. And as we defined that earlier in this video, you'll also notice that we've declared the input to be a phone number, which has some ramifications in terms of how the data is stored and ultimately read back. So at this point, the next step here is if we did in fact collect some input, this is our first set contact attribute. So what are we going to do here? We're going to make use of an attribute, not text. We're going to use an attribute. And in this case, we're going to use a system attribute. And as we previously explored, there are many different system, attributes that are created by the Connect instance that you have access to: media streams, Lex resources, external, user-defined, queue metrics, agent metrics. This one is system. What are we interested in here? We're interested in the stored customer input. So when we ask the customer to input their number, we got that information. We've got some error handling here. But basically, if we did collect it, we want to go in here and set that attribute. What are we doing here? We're going to set it to a variable that we have called number. Take the stored customer input and assign it to the user-defined variable named number. Once we do that, we're going to take that, assuming it's successful, we're going to get some additional customer input up here. And notice here, we're using the get customer input, not a store customer input. So what are we doing here? We're saying, once again, we're entering text to speech, and we're using SSML, not text. Again, common mistake is you forget to change this, in which case when you play the prompt, you're going to hear speak, and the tags will be spoken. We don't want that. We just want to hear the number you entered was, and here's an example of SSML speech control, where we're saying, say as interpreted, say it as a telephone number. And what is it? It's an attribute. Why is it attributes rather than external? Well, as we previously described, this was a user-defined attribute, not something we got from an external resource. So it's $.attributes. Notice it's plural, not attribute. $.attributes dot the name of the variable. And as you recall, we just set that to number. Press 1 to confirm or 2 to re-enter. So again, 2 is just going to walk you back through the process. If you press 1, we're going to invoke a Lambda function, which I'll show you in just a minute. And basically, the Lambda function is going to take some action, which we'll discuss in a minute. We follow it with some error handling. If it was successful, we come back down here and ask them if they would like to enter additional numbers. So there's a very simple interface to the dialer function. It's simple because we're having the user input the numbers rather than retrieving the numbers from a list, which we'll do in the second version of this. So once this has been completed, we've launched this function now. So if we go take a look at the function, we'll notice that there are some variables that we set in the function. These are called environmental variables, which means that they're listed, can be changed, right? So what are the function, excuse me, what are the so what we have in the function are some variables: instance ID, contact flow, source phone number, and destination phone number. So this is what the function needs. It basically needs to know the instance ID, which Amazon Connect instance that we're talking about. 2, we want it to have a contact flow. Now, the contact flow is the second piece here that this function is going to execute. It's going to cause it to run. And since that contact flow is basically an outbound contact flow, we need to have a source telephone number. We also need to have the destination phone number that we're dialing. So this is a simple function. It's Node.js function. Just takes advantage of the function that Amazon provides for activating an outbound dial call. So when we enter the number, we launch this Lambda function. This Lambda function, in turn, is going to execute the dialer function, and it will also launch the second contact flow. So we've looked at enter the notification number. Now, when that Lambda function launched, we're going to bring up this contact flow. We set the voice, and at this point, we're going to play an announcement. Now, keep in mind, the dialer function was handled by Amazon Connect instance. We expect the completed call to be transferred to the phone number in the function. And as a result, this script is going to run this contact flow. It's going to say, hello, this is an emergency and you've been notified. Press 1 to speak to a member of the EMT, or just hang up. And if they press 1, we're going to transfer it off to another phone number, which will launch yet another script. Optionally, we could have used a transfer to flow here. There's any number of ways to get the call to an agent. But this is a simple but effective strategy for doing an outbound notification. I know everybody has experienced robocalls. This is pretty much the strategy that is used for the press 1 robocalls.